come and speak to us this evening. When we were setting out to do all these events to celebrate our window and our birds and to find things to do that we thought would entertain and encourage people to come and look at them, we thought what we need to do is have somebody to tell us about why there are birds in a medieval window at all. And Hannah Googled medieval birds. Michael came up. So he's a medieval.
I actually Googled bird historian.
Bird historian. But so he's famous in Google, which means he's famous here in Clothall, and we're very, very delighted to have him here. I wanted to just say that we've got a whole year of events that we're doing, something every month right the way through to Christmas. If you'd like to come and support us, that would be absolutely wonderful. We have got a concert, which is on the 11th of July, which is in Clothall Church, because it's bigger, and we want to fill it. So if you feel that you would like to hear some music, and hear some poetry about birds, and hear all sorts of stuff that is bird adjacent, I think is what we say, please do come and support us there. We would love to see you. The concert, we've got about 30 performers coming to do that, so it would be nice if they didn't outnumber the audience. So please do that. We've got local choirs, we've got some professional singers and very accomplished amateurs and professional actors to come and do that. And we now, because we've been so, hello, come in. There are some more seats. You might find it best to be there or lovely. That's brilliant. We are doing this we're allowing you to sponsor a bird, which doesn't mean you get to take it away, you can keep them. But there are about 72 different birds in the window. Please, if you want to go and look at them, that would be lovely, but don't touch because you'll frighten them away, and we don't want that. And I wonder whether it might be easiest to sort of go around in a clockwise direction to stop having a crash. When you do go up, there's a step there which is, has caused many a trip, so please just avoid that as you go up. But we are now, we're on to our second panel of windows, because the first panel has all been sponsored. That's the middle one. So that's a great way of supporting us, and we'd like to mention you in our, we're going to put a book together with photographs and things like that, and mention everybody who's supported us so fantastically. So I think I've said probably more than enough, and I will shut up and hand you over to Michael, who I'm really fascinated to hear. Thank you so much.
Hello. Thank you to your church and your lovely building. I haven't really had a chance to look at it yet, but it looks like very much my sort of place. Out the way, secluded, right in the nook of land. You'd never know it was there unless like me tonight, you had to know. I thought I'd literally wear on my chest tonight what I'm all about, make it very clear that yes, I'm the bird man, apparently. Google me, I come up. There are reasons for that. One is because I did a PhD in birds in medieval poetry, and that became a book. So if you type in, yes, medieval birds, that book will come up. And last year I published this. This is not an academic book, this is nature writing. So nature writing is your thing, Robert Macfarlane and those kind of people. This might be up your streets. It's called The Cuckoo's League. It's all about, it comes from a medieval background, but it's a sort of, it's memoir, it's travel writing, it's nature writing, it's very descriptive, it's very personal, and it's all about birds and how birds connect us to place, which is not irrelevant when we think about the window that you have in your church. Sadly I don't have any with me tonight, but you can easily find that.
Do you think his microphone is on?
Do you want me to take up more? Hang on. Is that all right? Yes? Okay. You can find that, the paperback's just come out, so even cheaper to get hold of it now. Anyway, enough about that. Let's move on to thinking about your birds, Clothall birds. Being a medievalist, you wouldn't be surprised to know that I do love a church. We take it for granted, really, don't we? It's fantastic. In many countries in Europe, but in England, I think in particular, almost every village has a medieval church. And it doesn't mean a lot to many people, but it's a kind of stone solid connection back to our medieval past, isn't it? We should spend more time looking at them and in them. So I love a church, and I love a church that has an original medieval stained glass window, which you do. And even more than that, I love a church that has a medieval stained glass original window that has birds in it. There's not that many of those, and embarrassingly, until Hannah got in contact with me last year, I've never actually come across this one, which I was kind of surprised at actually, but I'm very glad that I've now become acquainted with it. So I'm going to give you a bit of context, essentially, tonight, that will allow you to think more deeply about those birds and the way in which they fit into the way in which birds mattered to people in the medieval world during the time or at the time when that window was produced. So, what was the name of the chap, David, wasn't it? He did these astonishing photos, which are on that whatever that blog was that you sent me. I'm guessing most of you have probably seen these, or you've had a good look at the originals, but I mean, they really are just stunning. Full of character, aren't they? So kind of lively and animated. Yeah, wonderful. So a bit of a disclaimer, I suppose, from the outset. What I can't do, sadly, is tell you that the birds in these windows are particular identifiable species. Or convince you that as a collection they convey a stunning ornithological accuracy, because they don't, I'm afraid. Maybe that will be a bit of a disappointment for some of you coming here tonight, hoping that I might say otherwise. But I do think, I say that as a lifelong bird watcher and a scholar of birds and medieval literature and artistic culture. So that's the starting point, but it gets better from here, because what that doesn't mean is that these gorgeous birds are not realistic in any sense, or that they don't tell us something about the ways in which people observed and understood birds in the Middle Ages. On the contrary, I think they very probably do. I hope to convince you of that this evening. So, as I said, what I want to give you is a bit of cultural context surrounding birds in medieval human, non-human relationships, so that we can more fully understand how these illuminated birds in the windows may have been intended and perceived. So the first thing to say is that medieval representations and perceptions of the natural, that is to say, non-human world, are far more complex than has traditionally been recognised. It's largely accepted now because of research by the likes of people like me and other environmental historians that actually medieval knowledge about and interactions with nature were not, as was once claimed, and I quote here, retrograde, which has been insulting, and not orientated towards facts. Previously, scholars, until quite recently, the last couple of decades really, concerned themselves, I quote again, not of course with birds as they are in nature, but as they exist in the mind. People looked at examples like this and thought, well, clearly people in the medieval ages, and long before that, and probably sometime after that, they clearly weren't interested in real birds, because have a look at them. They don't equate to real birds. And one author even went, so I won't say the person's name, but they even went so far as to say that people knew little about birds and cared even less on the basis of things like that. Well, I suspect that author will probably retract that comment now, and I hope by the end of this evening I will have convinced you otherwise. But you can kind of see what authors like that mean when you look at images like this in the windows. They don't seem all that orientated towards facts, or give the impression that artistic representations of birds were anything other than what was in the imagination. And when you consider the most famous and popular natural history book of sorts in the late Middle Ages, the time when these windows were produced, the bestiaries, I don't know if you've ever heard of them or come across them, the bestiaries, they were a sort of natural history book. I'll show you an example here. So you've got a bestiary owl, it wasn't just birds, the whole natural world, and a bestiary ostrich. Again, not the most realistic looking things. Do you think so? Do you think they're realistic? Not really. And you can kind of understand the viewpoint of these traditional scholars. And what's more, the plants and animals of these texts, they came with a very distinctly Christian moral agenda. The whole point of these books, which are very popular in the late medieval ages, they were meant to convey God's great truths, the pattern of his universal design in each and every life form. Like there was a doctrine of signatures, there was a message for us humans to learn how to live better lives and how to avoid all forms of sin. So the turtle dove, for instance, as is still popularly said, shows us fidelity and duty, and the ostrich, that humans should forget earthly concerns, and the owl teaches us to avoid the darkness of sin, and so on. But it's very possible, of course, for opposites, and we often come across this actually. Opposites or incompatibilities, they can often coexist. When you think or examine your own beliefs or your principles or your own set of values, you'd often find that there are contradictions, and you're happy to kind of let those lie, because that's the way that life works, isn't it? If I show you some other birds in medieval art, I think you get the picture. No pun intended. Down there. What about that? I know it's slightly tricky if you're over there to see the small image. Anyone come across the Sherborne Missile before? Sherborne's in Dorset? No. Well, go and Google them later on. They are superb and rightly famous. They're from a manuscript called the Sherborne Missile, late 14th century, so around about the same time as the East Window was produced. I believe that's 15th century, is that correct? Yeah, so ballpark, around about the same. A decade or so after the time of Geoffrey Chaucer, for instance. So they are roughly contemporary. So they give us a nice comparison. So you've got a blackbird there, a bullfinch, a crane. Great British shrike, it's a little bit of Orchard bird out, a winter visitor. But quite uncommon, which is why I put it in there. Because even slightly unusual birds are depicted with beautiful accuracy in this. The goldfinch, robin, house sparrow. And then we have this, late 14th century, contemporary again, from what's known as the Pepysian sketchbook, so called because it was once in the hands, it belonged to the famous diarist Samuel Pepys. And once again, you can see that there's a reasonable degree of accuracy there. Pretty accurate, wonderfully recognisable. There's sort of things some people might want to see in St Mary's window, perhaps. And indeed, it's possible that they could have done it. Because what we've got here is an example of a design portfolio, if you like. It's a series of images that might be selected by patrons for their artistic commissions, including stained glass windows, and which would then be reproduced to provide a larger template, or what was called a cartoon, ready for the window design. The birds in these windows would have been produced with what are known as cartoons. That's quite apparent when you look at some of those, it's low now, so I don't know whether you can see it, but some of them, you can see their mirrored images. So that the stencil, if you like, has just been kind of turned around. So this was an example of that sort of portfolio that might have been used. But we've got sparrowhawks here, and we've got clearly what's a bullfinch, and we've got a mallard duck being eaten by a hawk. So the point here is that lifelike alien depictions clearly did exist. Remember what I said about contradictions? And what's more, whether lifelike or not, birds as subject matter, they turn up an awful lot in medieval artistic culture, far more than you might expect, given the traditional perspective anyway. And that's a really key point for me. That they are there at all is not coincidental, or frivolous, or not necessarily so anyway. There's something about birds that resonated in medieval people's imaginations. So I'm going to give you a bit of a survey, some other examples to illustrate that further. We're going to enter the realms of literature now, which is my specialism. We're going to go actually back to beyond the late Middle Ages to the early medieval days, the Anglo-Saxon period, just to kind of show you where it all starts. And there's not so much actually in the way of bird art then. That seems to become a thing that has greater or develops greater popularity in the later Middle Ages. But there are certainly birds in literature. The first references, in fact, that we get in all of English literature. So I'm going to show you a special passage here from a poem known as The Seafarer. It's a deeply religious poem. It's a Christian poem. Written down in the 10th century, but possibly older than that. It just happens to be that it was written down at that particular time. It's about a literal and symbolic passage of a Christian narrator who seems to be some sort of sailor. We don't know exactly, because he's out on wintry, wild, stormy seas, and it's raining, and it's hailing, and it's snowing, and there's ice. So it's cold, you get the picture, it's cold. Winter. And this narrator talks about being forced out on the ocean in a voluntary committal to some sort of exile, because he is consciously rejecting life on land and everything it represents, materialism, effectively. He seems to be some sort of solitary monk seeking a hermit existence far from humanity, and he's particularly concerned with doing what's right in order to get to heaven at the end of his life. So it's a sort of pilgrimage, if you like, on the wintry, stormy seas. Anyway, to get back to birds. This is one of the parts of the poem that's become very well known because it mentions particular birds, as I said, for the first time in English literature. Seabirds specifically, which makes sense, of course, because we're talking about someone on the sea. And the seafarer identifies with them as companions in the depths of his self-inflicted misery in the interests of becoming closer to God and to heaven. So I'm going to read it for you in Old English, and you can see my translation down there. Chwilym i'r wettersonge, die ich niedergongene genetis liotto und chwilten sway. For liotto aware mausingen davon at our drinker. Storm as their stan cliffu biotten. There in stern enclave, isiferer, full oft that biael urig fedra. Excuse me, heavy stuff for Old English. So what's significant for our purposes tonight is the way in which the seafarer names the birds, specifically. Some of those you certainly will come across: a swan, gannets, probably, a curlew, probably, fairly recognisable seabirds, a lot of them. But he actually, it's not just seabirds generic, he gives us specific names. And a lot of those, for instance, you can see gannet here. The modern word is not that different, is it? It's almost identical. So you can see the roots of many of our bird names here. So they clearly existed and were used back in the Anglo-Saxon time. There are also birds that are flying because they're at sea. So there's that conceit as well. The birds fly. That's why they help us to think about ascending and transcending, and literally and figuratively, and particularly with regards to the soul in the medieval religious context. Notice how many fly in that window. So I have this here. Certainly one here, flying. But if you go and have a look, there's a good number of them actually flying. And indeed, in the seafarer, this poem a little later on, the narrator's soul does in fact fly out from his body to migrate, like a seabird, migrate across the ocean. And it's literally described using a word that there was the only time his word ever turns up is called armflocher. It means the lone flyer. The lone flyer. Also notice how all the seabirds' birds are described as making sound. Have a look at my translation. They're all making some sort of sound, song, calls. And it's the songs and calls that the seafarer prioritises. And that's something we notice in other literary representations, which I'm going to go on to. But once again, I draw you back to the birds in your window and look how many of them have their beaks open because they are singing. In the same Old English manuscript, there is a set of riddles. This is called the Exeter Book. I don't know if anyone's ever come across that. Again, you can Google it. In fact, now there is a really fantastic digitalised version of the entire Exeter Book. It's called the Exeter Book because, as far as we know, all of its existence, certainly the last 1,000 years, it has been kept and curated at Exeter Cathedral. And as far as we know, it was actually bequeathed to one of the bishops there in the 10th century. The reason it's very special, in fact it actually has UNESCO World Heritage status now. The reason that it's so special, and it's massive, I couldn't fit it on this little lectern here. The reason it's so significant is it contains, not quite all, but most of all Old English poetry that has survived. There are 4 manuscripts, not all of which are written. 4 manuscripts that contain all of it. And it's quite a lot. It fills a book. But it makes you think, what else was there that got destroyed by the likes of Henry VIII, for instance, during his ravishes on the Catholic Church, the dissolution. In the Exeter Book, we have the Seafarer, and we have a number of other poems that are in Old English, which actually in itself is quite significant because most things that were written down, particularly in a church context, would be in Latin. But someone saw fit to write these down in Old English. And they're written down in the 10th century, but a bit like I said with the Seafarer, almost certainly a lot of these probably go back centuries before. It's just that somebody has decided to write them down at this point. And there's a number of birds in riddles. Riddles were really popular in a monastic religious context. So we're a sort of learning exercise. Yeah, like, I suppose it's like doing Sudoku or something, yeah, or a crossword. And there's a number of birds included in that. So once again, we find birds turning up in all sorts of places that you might not expect. And here's one about a nightingale. Do you get nightingales up here? It's maybe just a touch too far north. I'm from Essex, and we have the nice nightingales in Britain. And I lived in Kent before that, and also a very good place. So that kind of southeast bit is fantastic. But it's a bird which is very much in decline. Used to find up to kind of Yorkshire area, but in a decade after decade, they're slowly just, range is just contracting down to that southeast corner, basically. So here's the Nightingale riddle. I speak through the map with many voices. The thing to focus on here again is sound. Right? That's the point I'm making, that it's all about song, it's about sound. I sing with modulations, frequently switch to my head voice, holler loudly, keep up my customs, do not hold back from cries. How many of you heard a nightingale before? Oh, you need to come to Essex next year. It's too late now, we're into June, they basically stopped singing. End of April, May is the best time to come to. It's all about that song for a nightingale, and that's a good phrase. They don't hold back. It's not the most beautifully melodic song, but it's very, very varied, and it's loud, and you get the sense that this is a bird that puts its effort into everything when it sings. Old evening poets. I bring to noblemen bliss in the towns when I bellow with bending voice. Still in their homes they sit silently, say what I am called. Who like an actress, the jester's song loudly apes, announces to men many greetings with my voice. It's a poem which is full of words for the voice, for song. That's what the poem really wants to emphasise about this particular bird. Nightingales were really popular more widely in medieval artistic culture. And they turn up a lot in late medieval literature, so literature contemporary with the window. And one of the best examples is an anonymous 13th century poem called The Owl and the Nightingale. Anyone heard of that one? There's a fantastic translation of it now by the poet laureate Simon Armitage. So if you're interested, after tonight's talking, getting hold of a copy of that, I encourage you to go and get Simon Armitage's translation of that. It's a debate poem in which the two birds in question, the owl and the nightingale, they go at it basically for a whole night, arguing pettily about who has the best voice, who serves humankind the best. Bird, somewhat surprisingly, turns up a lot in that poem too, which is pretty likely, given that we're talking about a nightingale and an owl and other birds that still, even if you've never seen an owl, it's a bird that we associate with sound, isn't it? And even the name of the owl comes from an Old English word, ulla, which is meant to be mimetic, is meant to be onomatopoeic of that sound that they make. Yeah, I think a tawny owl, those lovely kind of haunting song at night. So they're going at it, talking about who's the best, who's got the best song. And in fact, the poet intentionally mocks the nightingale's reputation as a famous songster. The owl remarks that there is nothing to the nightingale but chattering, basically. I quote in translation, "Once you're done twittering, you're all out of talent." Ooh. Cutting. She even puns on the name Nightingale, which again comes directly from the Old English, Nichtigala. Nichtigala, which literally means night singer. So song is built into that name as well. And she refers to the nightingale as a gala, which basically just means sing. And I think we can translate that essentially as something like blabber. I think that's what she's getting at. Stop! You talk rubbish! The owl and the nightingale is also one of the very best examples of that characteristic contradiction we identified earlier in the depictions of birds in medieval art. What's very obvious is this is a poet. He's very well versed in the literature of the nightingale, the romanticised, iconic literature of the nightingale, which existed in late medieval literature and was very popular long before the romantic poet John Keats, many centuries, got hold of the nightingale and wrote his ode to the nightingale and made it that peerless, immortal bird, as he says in that poem. Medieval poets were doing it long before that. This is a poet, he knows his stuff. He's clearly read all that. He's processed it, and it turns up in a very comic fashion in this poem. He knows how the nightingale as a species is a symbolic bird of the mind, to go back to that phrase from earlier. It has some distinctly obvious associations with love, romance, sex, dare I say. It's a pretty sexed up poem. Go and get Simon Armitage's copy. That's part of the whole comedy of it. It's a kind of takedown, if you like, of that lofty iconography of the nightingale. But, and this is the bit I love as an ornithologist, the poem definitely is aware of the real nightingale as well. You can see from the image there, it's not the most stunning looking bird. Brown, giraffe. I'm being a little unfair. If it turned round, you would see that the back of it is actually this gorgeous kind of chestnut, rich chestnut kind of colour. But it's certainly not something. But it doesn't need to be, because that's often the way that the evolution of birds has worked. They have one or the other. Some, of course, will have both, bit greedy, but you either have a beautiful sounding song, or you have very colourful plumage. So the nightingale has the song, it doesn't need anything else. As I said, the poem clearly knew the real nightingale. And that turns up frequently. The owl comments, where's my clicker? There it is. Give me up. This is the one of, there's a number of copies of this poem, one of the originals. I know that'll be a little bit hard to see from where you are. And there's a little quote there. The owl says of the nightingale that it's dim and foul, if I switch back to that. Oh, it's not. Dim and foul's a bit unfair, but you can see what it's getting at. Dim and foul in colour, like a little sooty ball, she says. And she tells her she can't see the nightingale because the bird is located in one impenetrable, thick hedge, intermingled with reed and sedge, Or you will find the nightingale where thorns and twigs are tangled among the nettles, where people, I love this bit, thrust out their backsides to do their dirty business. By the privy. If you've ever seen or heard nightingales, you'll know that's exactly the sort of habitat you encounter them in. They love dense, brambly scrub, basically. Which kind of diffuses that whole poetic, romantic concept of them, really, isn't it? Yeah. So this is the brilliance of this poem. You get that contrast that I've spoken about, those inconsistencies. This poet, what he brilliantly does, is to bring the two together and create this kind of clash of the two, the real and the metaphorical, or the real and the fantastical. And then, of course, there is Chaucer, the best known of medieval poets. And certainly contemporary, with not only the Sherborne Missal and the Pepysian sketchbook that I showed you, but I'm not exactly sure in the 15th century, when would it, do you know, have you got more precise time? 15th century, all right, but certainly Chaucer died at the very end of the 14th century, so these are kind of the next century on, so pretty contemporary. Chaucer clearly loved birds, and he includes loads in his works, and delights in the same sort of comic effect as the owl and the nightingale. And one of the best examples is in his debate poem, another debate poem. Medieval poets love the debate poem. The Parliament of Fowls, which, as the title suggests, is a gathering of birds. And in this case, in order to choose their mates on St. Valentine's Day, as far as we're aware, that's where the whole concept of St. Valentine's Day and love and romance comes from. It's because of Chaucer in this poem. It's a raucous, clamouring business in which all the birds jostle and vie for attention to make their voices heard. And for the sake of the human audience, the birds communicate in English. And we're meant to assume that actually they're going at it in their own kind of languages, but the narrator seems to have this kind of magical power in the dream world. It's a dream poem as well, by the way, it takes place in a dream. And that dream allows this narrator of the Parliament of Fowls to be able to understand, basically. To kind of, and then, in retelling the poem to us, to essentially translate. So this is what the birds were saying. It's fantastical and imagined, of course, but Chaucer reminds us of how real birds wouldn't grant us this help, because at one point in the dialogue, as you can see on the screen, between the birds, he has a single line in which the speech is conveyed as an indecipherable line of bird calls, and it comes right in the middle of the line. And you get cuckoo, quack, quack, which is meant to be respectively a goose, a cuckoo, that's obvious, and a duck, quack, quack. And it only happens once in the poem, but the fact that it does is ludicrous and fantastic, and shows us that Chaucer, like the owl and the nightingale poet, is having fun with this idea of birds that apparently can talk, which of course we know is fantastical, and reminding us of real birds at the centre of all this as well. That's why it's so funny. I like to think it's a kind of wry wink and a nod from Chaucer to let us know that he is fully aware that real birds do exist outside of poetry, and they don't behave according to our rules or our instructions. So let's go back to these. What's all this got to do with the Clothall birds? I don't think I've gone off topic a little bit there with my whistle-top survey of birds and literature. Well, as I said at the beginning, what I hope is that these examples, literary and artistic, alongside those manuscript illustrations, provide you with a broad context in which to recognise how the Clothall birds, which seem on the face of it unrealistic, decorative kind of emblems, I want you to see how they actually channel and embody a lot of the features of bird kind that we've seen medieval artists and writers depict in more ornithologically sound or experiential representations too. We shouldn't dismiss the Clothall birds as generalist designs, which are purely there for the purposes of pretty decoration. I mean, they are that, of course, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I want to suggest that even though these particular images are not outwardly realistic. The many other examples of birds in artistic culture, just some of which we covered this evening, they provide us with a convincing context in which to re-evaluate those depictions that on the face of it strongly convey, to re-quote from one of the authors earlier, that people knew little about birds and cared even less. I hope even after just my brief survey, you got the idea that people certainly did care about birds in various different ways. So what I think we need to recognise is that while some birds are depicted with thrilling, breathtaking accuracy, like the Sherman whistle, and others are, well, not, they can all be seen to exist within a scheme which repeatedly chooses and values birds for the qualities that we still recognise and celebrate in birds today. Their flight, their astonishing variety, their colour, their patterns, calls and songs. The Clothall birds embody all of that, I think you'd agree. They are undeniably animate, dramatised. They're not static portraits, are they? None of those are static portraits. They capture, I think, beautifully movement. People were talking about this just before the talk, weren't we? Full of movement. They're vital in that most literal sense, and that is imbued with vitality, with the breath of life. And that, I think, is a really critical thing here. Now, what I noticed most of all when I examined these birds is that vitality. They're all in motion. They're walking, they're flying, they're singing, variously doing those things. And they give this marvellous impression of great variety and difference. When I look at them, I can't help seeing something of the comedy of Chaucer's squawking parliament. Sense of humour, yeah, whoever painted them. And look how light they are. They make me think too of the seafarers' birds' oceanic migrations and their songs, of the nightingale in the exit of the riddle, and its mischievous arguments in the owl and the nightingale. And all of that dynamism, that characteristic diversity of birds turns up again and again in the way that birds are featured in medieval art, literature, and life. And I think a central reason for that is not just because birds are pretty, which of course they are, partly why we love them, but because birds dramatise what I like to call the passage and the progress of the world. The flux, the change, action of all life is evident to us, especially in birds, in a conspicuous and exciting way that we might say is just not so evident to us in many other forms of nature. Do you get swifts in Clothall? Yeah. Hands up if you've seen swifts this year or heard them. Yeah, good. Do you have them nested at all in Clothall? No one has a house where they nest, but you certainly see them over. I think that's a good example of what I mean by that passage and progress of the world. It's that far elsewhere, that long distance, in the Swift's case, Africa, coming to us. And that movement and that change and that sense that the world is always turning. And this is what birds represent to us. I think all of this is very evident in these window illustrations. It all links to many important themes in medieval thinking in life, as well as modern. Birds are constantly changing, they transform, they move. And if we remember that medieval people lived, of course, very difficult to get a building like this built in the late medieval age, they lived in a profoundly Christian time, when there was a great deal of emphasis on attending to one's passage through life with a view to getting to heaven, like the seafarer. That's what this building's all about. You can understand why birds might have been iconic and emblematic in that respect. And in that religious context, of course, is another very good reason why they would turn up in church windows. So there's one last context that I'd like to consider in connection to the Clothall birds, if I may. And it's one that initially might not seem to be relevant, but bear with me, because I hope it's going to equally illuminate what's going on in these alien depictions. And the reason it doesn't seem relevant is because it's to do with real birds, not artistic depictions. And here I'm going back to my book, The Cuckoo's Lead, which is about place names. It's about those early origins of place names and the way in which birds turn up in those. Nearly all English place names, without starting to think about Scotland and Wales and Gaelic and various other languages, just taking England, our place names are nearly all medieval in origin, early medieval at that, 1,000 years, 1,500 years, some even older. The settlements, hamlets, villages, towns, cities, they all go way back before the Norman Conquest, and therefore, of course, their names do as well. We can trace in the origins of those names and the acts of naming what mattered to people when it came to the places in which they lived and worked. And of course, let's remember that medieval people, as for centuries before and after, millennia before, they all lived out their entire lives in the context of a parish. They lived parish lives. So of course, it stands to reason that they knew their local environments, the ecosystems, and the wildlife that existed within those ecosystems. They knew it very well, incidentally, because they lived very local existences themselves. They were quite literally parochial in the most original and true sense of that word. And we know that birds must have been important to all of that because they turn up a lot in our place names. I mean, in the hundreds, even thousands when you start to take into account minor place names. And the whole natural world does. I shouldn't do everything that's not a bird a disservice. But the whole natural world is there. The whole gamut of Britain's flora and fauna is there in our place names. But there are, plants accepted possibly, certainly animals, there are significantly more birds than anything else, which tells you something about that mindset again. Where's my little needler? There it is. Ooh, well, most of you, I imagine, know this anyway. I'm not teaching you anything you don't know here. Clothall, a nature place name, just to give you a non-bird example, meaning the nook of land where burdock grows. Driving in this evening, not 15 minutes before I had to start talking, trying to find the church. It was immediately obvious. Oh, yeah. I don't need to know the name. I can tell from the landscape. Because you're sort of secreted away in this little kind of nook of land, aren't you? This little kind of valley in between the hillside. And that's what the second part of the name would have referred to. Meaning kind of a secret place, a little corner, yeah, that's kind of hidden away, essentially. And it's associated with burdock. So it's a really lovely name. It's very, as many of them are, it's down to earth, it's humble, it's intimately local, and it illustrates my point really nicely. It's very typical in that respect. It shows us how once almost everywhere was local in that way. Everyone was local in that way. And because of that, you knew as a resident of the vicinity where burdock grew and could be collected for medicinal purposes, culinary purposes. Here are some bird examples, or rather, images of birds that turn up in our place names. Some of those may surprise you, some of them you probably are aware of. On the bottom row, for instance, the crane. More cranes than any other bird species. Hundreds of cranes. Which tells us something about how different the landscape would have once been with far more wetland that was capable of supporting those fantastic birds. But you get wrens, and you get ducks, and there's a kingfisher there, and there's a great tit here, and there's a chaffinch, and there's a raven. Eagles, lots of white-tailed eagles. There's sparrows, there's thrushes, and this is just a very, very small selection of what I can fit on the screen, basically. Here are some genuine English place names. But there's a little trick. They don't all include birds. So I'm going to let you scan that. I know that's not easy to see because it's not the biggest projection, but which ones do you think have birds in? You can tell I'm a teacher. I'll give you 30 seconds. Well, I won't keep you hanging. The answer is not the ones that you think would be. basically. So Swallowfield and Swanscombe and Duck's Cross and Hawkwell, nothing to do with birds, which is a really important reminder that you cannot, in most cases, apart from one I'm going to come to in a second, you cannot assume the meaning of our place names based on the modern spellings. Because of course, over the centuries, they've changed. All the ones that you look at and think, I have no idea what those mean, they are bird place names. I'll give you a translation there. It's all the ones in black, basically. Refer to birds. Now then, I'm going to give you a Hertfordshire example. A place that's just 7 miles away from here to the east or thereabouts. Anyone want to guess it? Because it is actually one that, if you know some of your birds, you might actually better guess it being a bird place name. Because yes, well done. Because it does. It's one of those rare ones that appears. It seems to be a bird, and it actually turns out to be so. Unlike most of these, which you'd never guess at. I'm talking about Buntingford. Yeah, it's a bird place name. Translates as something like the ford where you will often see and hear buntings, which is just lovely, isn't it? Again, it's that beautiful sense of the local, the intimacy, the integrated feeling of people and the landscape, the ecosystems, of being a part of that rather than being detached from it. Now, exactly what sort of bunting? Well, that's more difficult because there wasn't quite the level of scientific distinction that there is in more modern times. I mean, I like to think of yellowhammer, just because they're lovely and bright and beautiful. But it could be a reed bunting, or possibly even a corn bunting. What I really love about this, whatever species it was that it is a bird that you might not necessarily expect to turn up in place names. You can understand, I think, eagles, particularly white-tailed eagles, which are absolutely huge, cranes, cuckoos out, because they're all big or impressive and or easily noticed, or they've made themselves really familiar in folklore, like the cuckoo, for instance. Even if you've never seen a cuckoo, even if you've never heard one, you know what that bird sounds like. But not buntings, or wrens, or dunnocks, or sparrows. That's a dunnock. These are mostly what birdwatchers call little brown jobs, LBJs. How is it, I wonder, that a dunnock led to someone or a group of people at some point deciding that a copse, that's what the second part, the shore bit, relates to in Dunnockshire. A copse in Lancashire was best identified by that bird. It blows my mind. That became a place identifier, a dunnock. I think what this collection of birds and place names shows us, especially names such as Buntingford, is that even the poorest agricultural worker, which was most people, remember, could attain deep knowledge of his or her own world. So that when they saw a wren, or a dunnock, or a bunting, their perception differed entirely from that of the merely passing traveller. What the names give us is a glimpse into that peasant world, and what we see is a deeply intimate, integrated, and intuitive insider's knowledge. So birds, as I think our place names show us particularly well, brought the real places of real people's lives to life. They made them places that were charged with the forces and elements of nature, and they vivified a deep sense of place through colour. We just go back to, colour, flight, and song. I'm actually looking at that yellowhammer. It's not a million miles away from some of these birds. In terms of its posture, beak open, singing. All of these things are present in the birds of St. Mary's stained glass windows. Window, I should say. Go and take a look at them now, or next time you get a chance, and think about how those cheeky, quirky little things convey a lot more than meets the eye. They're the product of an age that in many different ways understood and celebrated how birds brought joy, meaning, and all nature's rich transformations to bear in every part of their lives. Thank you for listening. I have managed to finish up. Bang on time, actually. We've got 5 minutes, so I did want to leave a little bit of time in case there were any questions. No pressure, absolutely does not have to be, or if you'd rather come up and chat afterwards, also fine. Are there any questions? Yes?
How many more bird windows are there that you know of in the country? I mean, I've never heard of another one, so
I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think of one. But there are, there's not many. There's not many. Oh, go on.
Well, we know that there's, York Minster has and sells postcards of the 2 birds that they have in their windows. There are some in Soham in Cambridgeshire, and there are several others in smaller parish churches, but they're not very many, and certainly I don't think anywhere has as many as we do.
No, I mean the ones that I was most aware of is in a village that was close to where I lived in Kent, which is a place called Sandalhurst, and that has some birds in there, but nothing like this. They're not colourful like this, just kind of etchings really. And it's thought actually that they did come from the Pepysian sketchbook because of the parallel between them. So the answer is not all that many, but there are some others. Hi.
Hi, you had Amberley on your list. My house is called Amberley, and I understand the person that named it Amberley is after a village in Gloucestershire.
Yeah, there is an Amberley in Gloucestershire. There's one. So I know the one in West Sussex. I grew up in Worthing. There's actually quite a. So buntings are one of those birds that turn up in quite a number of places
So
all around
Amberley
the
is
country. So amber specifically, we can't be sure of this, but amber probably specifically referred to the yellow hammer. And if you think about the end of that, this is a really good example of how over the century there's been a corruption of the original. It's got nothing to do with hammers at all, but hammer, take off the H, the amber bit. Amber, amber, arm, you can kind of see that. And actually the word that is, the name that is recorded in Old English dictionary is armour, A-M-E-R, and it is directly cognate with the modern German for that bird. So it's thought probably they shared a common ancestor linguistically, and that probably was their name for the yellow hammer. And the Lee bit, very, very common place name ending, means a clearing, either a woodland, but later on came to be a clearing in woodland, or clearing in some sort of vegetation. So the woodland clearing where you might, or be likely in spring to hear the yellows.
Yeah, I'm from Gloucestershire and there's a lot of yellow hammers. Very good.
You asked if there was nightingales, and
Yes.
half an hour from here, Axon Pits, isn't there?
Yeah.
Sort of 3 or 4 still there. They're not singing, as you said, but they don't get so many as they used to. It's the
Do
next-
you know that they've been there this year?
Yes.
Okay, that's good.
They come about April, and 2 weeks ago we heard them singing, but because the deer get in, they eat the undergrowth, so that's possibly why there's not so many.
Oh, that's good to know, because I spoke to a warden of the area and a few years ago when I was writing a book, he said that they were no longer turning up at those
They
events.
were, yes.
Good.
Someone
That's
saw
good.
something this
Oh,
morning.
I fixed that. Revise it.
There was down in Strawberry Hill Farm in North Bedfordshire last year, and I suspect they were this year, but there wasn't there.
Right.
They're also
Yeah.
down Lady Heath Fen.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I know that they're there. That's a good territory for them. Yeah. Hi.
Can you make a different bird calls yourself? If not, why not?
No, I don't think so. I mean, sometimes I could do a cuckoo, but I'm not that great at listening. That sounded like a great tip to me. Did you intend that to be a great tip? No? Squeaky bicycle well done, great tip. Very good. Right.
Do you have any more precise date for these windows?
No, apparently so. No, I don't. I mean, I can't find any other kind of academic literature on them. So the only reason I know they're 15th century is because that's what I've been told.
Yes. We are learning more about these windows as we've had the benefit of various experts coming to look at them. And so we knew a little bit, but some of what we knew is wrong. And so I'm slightly nervous about trying to be in any way definitive about it. What we believe is that the birds in the central panel are all medieval glass. And the ones on either side, some of them are still medieval, but a lot of them were Victorian, I suppose, attempts at replication. And the window was put together in the 1860s, so it was reconstituted from earlier glass. But certainly some of it is very much old, old glass, and the replication has been done in quite a cunning way and fooled somebody who I think probably was slightly embarrassed when they realised that some of it was Victorian. They looked closer because it's quite well done.
Yeah. I mean, I'm re-looking at these now, but having said that there's not ornithological accuracy. I wonder whether this one is meant to be a rain. I quite like. There's something rainy about that one. Yeah. Any other questions?
I'd just like to add one thing that's interesting.
Oh,
Is when up in Shropshire, they're quite artistic, and they do a lot with stained glass, which fits with, what the church has got here planned for the activities. And there is a real interest in the bird leading the deceased out to eternal life. And I might, at the end, I'll probably have to take your name to send you the details, but a stained glass person who's very able might be able to tell you a bit more about that.
That would be lovely, yeah.
I've actually got a Facebook contact with her, but I've hardly ever speak to her because I don't really know her. But no, it's quite fascinating that. It's almost as if the kings might have been like the pharaohs, but the ordinary people assumed the local bird would take them.
Yeah.
It's just a nice imaginative idea of mine there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure whether in these instances or not, in some stained glass windows, I'm sure that must have been a part. I mean, it's why angels have wings, right? They quite clearly have birds' wings, don't they? And it's this idea of ascension.
You mentioned that some of the postures that the birds are singing. Are any of them, do you think, sort of like the display that didn't have in the breeding behaviour? Do you think?
I mean, it looks like some of them are certainly kind of posturing in that way. I mean, song would very much be a part of that. That's what one of the key purposes of song. Nearly always is the male doing the singing. And in the Owl and Nightingale, the bird in question is described as being female. And that actually goes back a very, very long way. It was believed until actually quite recently. Even John Clare, famous romantic poet, nature poet, writing in the first part of the 19th century, who writes superbly accurate nightingale poems. He describes a nightingale as female, because of this common misconception that it was the female bird that did the singing. It's not the male. Like cuckoo as well, like pretty much every other bird, because it's a part display. Okay.
Well, let me just finish, if I may, by thanking Michael for an absolutely fascinating and really illuminating talk. This whole business of dealing with these birds has been so wonderful because we've learnt so much. And what's lovely, there's this sense of place. We're all from this locality, and these birds were here. They will be here long after any of us are around, and their song has not changed. And in terms of when you think of what bits of art, we can't really understand the old English. You do because you've studied it, but it doesn't sound like that. But these things still speak to us. Poems speak to us, but we have to have some help. These birds still speak to us directly because we can recognise them and where they have that sort of amazing sense of place. So it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Should we do one more round of music? We would love you to stay with us for a drink. If those of you who would like to go and look at the window, please do that. If anybody feels that they haven't paid, I'm sorry to be mercenary about it, but I can take a card. So that would be lovely. Please do support our events. We still don't know really how much it is going to cost to renovate the window. What we're hoping to do, because the glass is now getting it's suffering, it's been keeping the Hertfordshire weather out for 500 odd years. It's now at the stage, in many ways it's the Victorian glass that is suffering more than the medieval glass. What we're hoping to do is to put a modern window behind it to keep the weather out, so that the glass will do the job of being beautiful and not keeping Hertfordshire's wind and rain and everything else out of this church, so that others can enjoy it way beyond us. So if you want to be further part of supporting that work, please come and support our events. It's great to get everybody together to celebrate these lovely things that we all share. There is wine, there's red or white, and there's soft drinks, there's bird windows to look at. Michael, I'm sure will answer any other questions. Thank you so much for sharing this evening with us.
If you haven't signed our visitors book at the back, please do, just because it's lovely to know who has come and where from. So if you haven't done that, please do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes.
It's sort of